Hello, you're back. Good to see you. Good to see you. Glad you're back. Welcome to Studio 720, high atop Chapel Hill. Here we are, bringing you technology and business innovation. I'm your excellent host, Professor Al Seegers. It's great to have you here. Tonight, again, another exciting technology, another exciting topic, something that I think is booming as an industry, something that is exciting but also challenging. So this is one of those technologies that you study, one of these technologies that you start to learn about. And the more you learn about it, the more you realize that it's fantastic, that there are a lot of new innovations headed our way. But this may be also the most challenging technology. And of course, I'm talking about biotechnology. Biotechnology is the engineering of living cells. Everything from our DNA to stem cells, to organic material that occurs in nature. Anything organic, the re-engineering, the application of physics, science, chemistry, all of these things to living cells, to living material is the domain, if you will, or the frontier of biotechnology. Now, of all the technologies that I researched for this particular article and that I explored, I'm going to have to say that biotechnology was the one that I was least knowledgeable about. I went into this and did not have a whole lot of knowledge about it. However, I do have family members that are actually working in this area. One is my daughter, Kristen. She is a medical student, PhD, MD at Boston University, and she is working in labs there around the application of bioprinting and biotechnology in terms of replacement therapy, if you will. And of course, my brother, Paul Seegers, who works at that other university, Duke University, Dr. Paul Seegers. He is a radiology professor, biomedical engineering professor, and so he was certainly helpful in getting me indoctrinated in the field. All of that said, I'm going to have to say this is a very exciting field. It's a very interesting field, but it's also one that really pushes the frontiers of how we're going to treat disease, how we're going to render medical care. We're in a very different frontier ahead of us. I find it exciting. I find it encouraging, but I also find it very challenging in sort of a good way. So I don't want you to think it's a bad thing, but this is one where you have to think a little bit about the technology. So without further ado, let's go in and take a look at the frontier of biotechnology. Okie doke, here we go, and away we go into biotechnology. Now again, just as a reminder, this is our third stop along the way of the 7, the first one being pervasive computing, the second one being mesh networking, and now we're into the realm of biotechnology. Now, one of the things that I hope you're starting to see here is the interconnection between some of these technologies. You start to see a little bit of pervasive computing in biotech. You're going to see later on biotech and additive manufacturing combine to form different technologies. These are called super technologies. When when one of these 7 technologies combines with another, you really get super technologies. You get technologies that really are able to do almost what seems like magic. And again, that's the best definition of the frontier of technology. If it seems like magic, it's a technology that has really come into its own and something that is on the way to becoming a viable product or a viable service. So when we get into biotechnology, one of the things that I want you to think about here is we are now in what is called life sciences. So the application of physics, biology, technology to health and well-being. That is certainly the medical aspect of it. There's also another aspect of life sciences where we apply it to agriculture, and you're going to see that. But all of it is really to health and well-being. We're trying to take living material and trying to make it have properties that don't naturally occur in nature or may not occur in its first form. So think of biotechnology as the re-engineering of organic material. An incredible frontier. Now, also, as we go into biotech here, one of the things I want to make you aware of is that you do get some effect of data processing and of supercomputing that comes into biotechnology. When we go into this a little bit and you start to see DNA sequencing and you start to see gene editing, gene engineering, one of the things that you have to be aware of is that there's a whole lot of machine learning, a lot of data science, and a lot of computational science that really starts to enter the picture. And you really start to see that influencing this field. So biotechnology is almost made possible by incredible boosts in computational power and the ability of machines to learn and to comb through large amounts of data and help physicians, help lab technicians, help scientists render solutions. So let's jump in and see some of the greatest hits of biotechnology. Just to remind you, I always remind you of this with each technology visit that we make. Biotechnology is a large class of technologies. So think of it as a huge bucket, a huge frontier of technologies. And we could do, again, an entire class. We could do maybe 2 or 3 classes. Very easy on biotechnology and still only glance the surface of what these technologies are. But I thought what I would do is take you through the greatest hits. Having looked through these technologies, certainly in research, part of the MSNBC Disruptor 50, and other research that I do, to give you some that are sort of here and now and sort of give you an idea of, from a looking glass standpoint, of what is out there in terms of this exciting technology. So let's jump in and see the different classes, or the different greatest hits, let's call it that, of biotechnology as they are right now. Again, this list may change. Regenerative medicine. This is actually a very, very exciting field. Now, when we get into regenerative medicine, what we're doing is actually creating cells that create other cells, if that makes sense. Now, one of the most popular of these types of therapies is stem cell therapy. Basically, your body, everybody's body is made up of cells. That's the basic building block of organic material. And so when we start to think about how cells operate, how cells multiply, how they are structured, we can get into some engineering that's really interesting, but also very challenging. So let's talk about the stem cell. Basically, everybody has stem cells in their bodies. Now, cells in your body have dedicated functions. Once they have dedicated functions, those functions cannot be changed. For example, you have hair cells, you have skin cells, lung cells, heart muscle cells, a whole variety of cells. Once these cells are programmed, they cannot be reprogrammed. So a hair cell is forever a hair cell. Stem cells are different. They're magic cells. They're typically found in bone marrow, and these cells are basically empty pallets. These are cells that have yet to take on a responsibility, and they can be programmed to take on a specific responsibility. For example, if someone suffers an injury to their lungs, so let's say there's some emphysema or there's some tragic accident and a lung is damaged. Stem cells can be used. They can be injected into the damaged material to regenerate the damaged cells. So rather than cutting away some part of a lung, rather than trying to repair the damage surgically, what we try to do is regenerate the muscle or regenerate the material by boosting it with stem cells. These stem cells will take on the form of healthy lung cells, and they will basically recreate the organ and the functioning of the organ. This is very, very exciting therapy. It's something that has evolved very, very rapidly over the last 10 years. Initially, it was very, very controversial. Why? Because the largest source of stem cells for any person is from birth material. So placenta or newborn material, fetus cells. And so this is very, very controversial. It's very, very tough because you're taking cells that are in the process of becoming a living being, and you're taking the cells and using them for stem cells. And it's very controversial because we get into issues of aborted fetuses and things like that. It's very difficult for me to even talk about. It's just so tough. I mean, it's a very, very tough issue. But there's good news. There's very, very good news. Again, one of the most common places to find stem cells are the umbilical cords of newborn children. And so many parents will actually save the umbilical cords of newborn children. They can be stored, and those cells are basically a warehouse of stem cells should the child grow up and need them later on in life. So there are ways to harvest stem cells that sort of dodge this issue of trying to harvest them in different ways. Bone marrow has a lot of stem cells in it. And again, the idea here is that the best stem cells in stem cell therapy are your cells. So the most ideal situation is to harvest stem cells from your bone marrow and then use those as a source of recreating whatever is damaged in your body. It's fascinating therapy, and now there are other ways of creating this. And as you can imagine, where this is going is in labs trying to manufacture stem cells. And that's sort of where we are with the technique. So let's take a look inside and see how stem cell therapy works and how it's being used in today's surgical and operational treatments.
You're looking at a few hundred cells here that are working together.
The heart muscle cells that Dr. Tim Nelson views highlight recent advances into regenerative medicine.
The simplest way to explain that is it's the opposite of degeneration.
Tissues in your heart, joints, and other areas can degenerate or break down with time or disease. Regeneration is the renewal of those tissues, which is something the body does naturally.
So one strategy is to try to find ways to improve the healing of your body. And another strategy is to actually supplement or augment the stem cells in your body so that we can improve the healing by transplanting stem cells into it.
Dr. Nelson and his colleague Dr. Andre Terzik use stem cells in their research because stem cells are responsible for growing new tissue.
So stem cells just means that they're seeds that can grow into many, many tissues.
Stem cells can come from a variety of places: embryos, which are not generally used anymore, umbilical cord blood, adult or adult bone marrow.
So the type of stem cell will dictate how many different types of tissues can emerge out of it.
Scientists can engineer stem cells into the type of cells they want. Here's how it works. Cells called fibroblasts are removed from a patient's skin. They're reprogrammed into what are called pluripotent stem cells. Those cells can be taught to become any type of healthy cells, such as these heart muscle cells. The idea is that the newly engineered healthy cells, when introduced to, say, those of a failing heart, will help restore or regenerate the function of the unhealthy cell.
This is one cell that's contracting, is working with many cells, and that gives the whole tissue
the contraction pattern like a normal heart.
It becomes much more real when you have a personal connection to a disease or an illness where we don't currently have good options. And this is where people are asking more and more of the questions, what about stem cells?
The answer is researchers such as these at Mayo Clinic push forward to make regenerative medicine a reality for patients searching for successful treatment and perhaps cures. For Mayo Clinic News Network, I'm Vivian Williams.
So again, it's really exciting when you start to see what's possible in stem cell research. This research has really come a long way, I would say, over the last 10 years, certainly. One of the things that was kind of interesting is when there is a patient case, the thing that I noticed in visiting hospitals and Mayo Clinic, we're going to see them again on down the line. They're an organization that's incredible in their research and in their discoveries, is that many times stem cell is not offered as a frontline or first line type of treatment. It's something you have to do a little research on and you have to ask for. So should you run into an issue where an organ is failing in yourself or in a loved one, it is something worth asking about. There are therapies, there are techniques now where stem cell therapy is available, and it's something that has had some very, very positive results. So it was interesting to me, I think, as a researcher, to go in and investigate hospitals, and there was, I would say, an uneven playing field, if that's the right way to put it, in terms of whether the hospital or whether the medical facility would suggest that, would offer that, or would talk to patients' families about that. And that's just how new the technique is. And it's how the technique sort of evolves. Certain research centers and certain hospitals may be more forward thinking and more willing to recommend that type of therapy than others. But regenerative medicine using stem cells is a very fascinating field. On down the line, in fact, in our next technology, you're actually going to see how cells can become the input for raw material that is used in 3D printing to also produce other living material like blood vessels. So it's really interesting when we start to think about living cells being the same as material that's used for manufacturing, or at least it becomes part of that equation. So again, it's a technology that I think is exciting. There are businesses being built around this. So again, what I think you need to do as a business student, as a business leader, is really start to think about how that might change industries, how that might change patient care, how might that change the cost economics of treatment, of therapy, and of patient strategies. And it's revolutionizing a lot of things. And I think that's really is the business of healthcare. To me, it's very, very hard to imagine going into the healthcare field and not knowing something about the underlying treatments and something about the underlying therapies that are now being revolutionized by these 7 technologies, in particular biotechnology. Well, that leads us to our next one, and this one may be the most challenging of all: gene editing. So when you think about yourself, your DNA is basically a blueprint that tells you who you are, that creates who you are, and allows you to function as you function. So DNA, to me, when I was learning about it, thinking about it, DNA is like this major architectural blueprint of your body that is, number one, very complex, and it is unique to you. So when someone tells you there's no one like you, or that they broke the mold when they created you, they're right. You're unique, and that's wonderful, isn't it? I think it's part of the magic of life, part of the magic of who we are, is that when you meet someone, you are meeting a very, very unique human being, a very, very unique product of nature. And that is your DNA. But DNA can go wrong. Within your DNA, there can be errors that give you a predisposition or can cause pretty catastrophic things. Cancer, high blood pressure, diabetes. These are DNA strands within your blueprint that can be, I guess the best word to say is in error, or cause you to have these problems, whereas the next person or the next person may not have these problems. For example, many people, or some people, not many people, but people may find themselves with pancreatic cancer. That is a DNA sequence that is actually wrong, if you want to call it that, when you're born. That is in error when you're born, and in some people, that DNA sequence may produce pancreatic cancer later on in life. For some, it doesn't. That's really some of the mystery behind DNA. But through computational science, through big data, through artificial intelligence, all of those are coming down the line. It is possible to actually identify, isolate, and change DNA sequences that may lead to catastrophic illness down the line. And that is the function of the technology CRISPR-Cas9. It's an incredible technology. It is one that is being pioneered at the Broad Institute in MIT. You're going to see them again down the road in the class when we talk about amazing organizations and how they come up with ideas. But CRISPR-Cas9 is a technology that can resequence or edit the DNA so that your predisposition or your likelihood of having some catastrophic illness or having something such as diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, these types of things can be corrected. Now comes the interesting part of this. If we can correct DNA sequences to change our predisposition towards developing certain types of cancer, to developing certain types of heart disease, on and on and on, is it possible that we can also edit DNA to give us more desirable features? Perhaps hair that never turns gray, or to be 6 foot tall, if that's your desire. On and on, you can think about this, to be super athletic. Well, that is within the realm of possibility. There's just no way to get around it. There's no way to talk around that. It could lead to other things that may not be as desirable to society. However, when we think about the good that it might do in terms of healthcare costs, of living more full lives, living lives where we don't encounter these catastrophic diseases, there certainly is a whole, I would say, ledger of good things that can happen. But on the other side of the ledger, there are these things that are tough issues. And that's what ethicists are working through now. It's what business leaders are working through now, and the scientists themselves. So let's hear from the chief scientist, the inventor of CRISPR-Cas9, certainly one of the team of inventors, Jennifer Doudna. And what she'll do is tell you about the technology, and she is very, very thoughtful about its implications, good and bad. So let's hear from her, from the Broad Institute at MIT.
I think the thing that's amazing about science and about biology for me is that there's always more to be discovered. And every time we feel like we've figured something out, it seems to open up several more questions. Scientists have appreciated for a long time that once we understood the DNA sequence in cells, if we had a tool that would allow easy manipulation of that sequence, that would be a very powerful kind of technology. CRISPR is a technology for changing the sequence of DNA in cells in a precise fashion to correct mutations that might otherwise cause disease. It's going to enable a lot of science to be done that was impossible to do in the past. So the way the CRISPR technology works is by the action of a protein called Cas9 that functions like a molecular scalpel for DNA. The CRISPR-Cas9 system has an amazing ability to recognize a particular DNA sequence in a cell that may be malfunctioning and then disable it by cutting the DNA. We call this gene editing, and we can use it to disable or repair a mutated part of the gene, which may be causing disease. For Cas9 to find the malfunctioning DNA, we attach it to an RNA sequence that matches the DNA sequence we want to edit. Then we put this RNA-Cas9 combination into the cell. It finds the mutant DNA and uses a chemical reaction to cut the DNA strand right at the spot where it's malfunctioning. After that, we can sometimes insert the correct version of the gene for the cell to work properly again. It's a very exciting technology that's going to do a lot of good in human society and for human health. It stretches from human therapeutics to agricultural applications to thinking about how do we make better biofuels. These would be incredible outcomes, I think, of using this kind of technology in the future.
Incredible, incredible. Again, this is a technology that had its beginnings in the Human Genome Project at MIT, the Broad Institute, and also at Berkeley, and that's Lawrence Livermore Labs, which again, we will talk about them as well on down the line as far as organizations that are really pioneering the impossible. Now, interestingly enough, if you think about the applications for CRISPR-Cas9, one of the more interesting treatments was actually discovered, if you will, or actually applied when it was realized that people differ in terms of their tolerance to pain. Now, one of the interesting cases of this was a young boy who could walk on coals. He was a Pakistani boy, and he had a street performance, and what he would do is walk on coal and hot coals. And this was something that was seen by some physicians and by some researchers that were watching him. And they began to ask themselves, is it possible that there are people who tolerate pain better than others? Now, what that would mean is there are people with a DNA sequence that causes them to not feel pain in the way that others might feel pain. And of course, you could reverse that and say there are people that have a very low tolerance to pain. They would have a DNA sequence that would be different and would predispose them to not being able to our feeling pain very acutely. So when they were thinking about this, they wanted to examine not only the boy himself, but his family. Unfortunately, they could not get to the boy. The boy was doing street performing, and one of his tricks was to leap out of windows on high atop buildings. He would jump from very tall buildings, and of course he would get a lot of tips and payment for doing so. And unfortunately, the young man jumped a little too high and passed away, which again gives you some idea of the disadvantage of not being able to feel pain. You don't know that you're really hurting yourself as much as you are. But they did examine the boy's family and other families of people that have a high tolerance for pain. And what they discovered was yes, there is a DNA sequence. There is a pattern that allows some people to endure pain better than others. Well, if you could take that sequence and replicate it in people that suffered from chronic pain, you might be able to ease their suffering. And so that has become a research project and a therapy that has gained a lot of traction and has shown a lot of promising results. So what would happen here is that if someone were in chronic pain due to some illness or perhaps they suffer rheumatoid arthritis or some other ailment, that the DNA sequence of that person could be altered in a way that allows them to cope with the pain much better. So again, you're seeing fairly creative, or actually not fairly, very creative applications of gene editing. This is something that is continuing to evolve, and it is evolving rapidly in terms of a field of study, a research result, and I think early business cases that tell you that these early manifestations are solid evidence of this technology really, I think, evolving rapidly, number one, and becoming part of mainstream treatment. So let's take a look at just a few more applications here of this incredible technology.
For the first time, scientists have used the gene editing technology known as CRISPR inside a patient. The groundbreaking procedure was performed in Oregon. The microscopic gene editing tool was injected directly into the eye of someone who is nearly blind. Scientists hope to restore sight by editing DNA from inside the person's body. Traditionally, doctors remove cells when using the CRISPR technique. The genes are then edited in a lab before being returned to the body. But if this new approach is successful, experts say it could revolutionize treatment for an array of diseases. Joining me now from San Francisco is Dr. Eric Pierce. He's a professor of ophthalmology at Harvard Medical School, and he's the director of the Inherited Retinal Disorders Service at Massachusetts Eye and Ear. Dr. Pierce is also leading a study into the CRISPR technique. So, Dr. Pierce, I have to say that this sounds incredible. Please tell us more about the condition of the Portland patient and how scientists use the CRISPR technique in a completely new way.
Well, you're right. We're really excited about this trial and the ability to use CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing to treat inherited disorders such as inherited blindness. The focus of this study is inherited blindness due to mutations in a gene called CEP290. And just as you described in your introduction, the gene editing technology is directed at removing the mutation in the CEP290 gene, which causes it to dysfunction, leading to decreased vision.
So when do you expect to see results in this patient?
So based on other studies of gene therapies we're doing for inherited types of blindness, we would hope to see improvement within the next 2 to 4 weeks that could continue to accrue up to 3 to 4 months.
And then how long until the CRISPR technique is then employed in other types of procedures? And I'm also wondering, as you're leading this study based on this procedure, what are some of the other conditions that could potentially benefit?
So there are already studies going on in labs around the country, around the world, to develop the use of CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing and related technologies to treat other forms of inherited blindness and other inherited diseases like Duchenne muscular dystrophy or inherited forms of dementia. So we're hoping that if we get this right, if we can show that using gene editing in vivo is safe and effective, that it will quickly be adopted to treat multiple other forms of genetic disease.
This is incredible, groundbreaking research with such potential. I mean, when you hear something like dementia, inherited dementia, I'm thinking multiple sclerosis, but you said muscular dystrophy.
Muscular dystrophy. That's right.
Yes, but other techniques that have a genetic component. I can't help but think that even as this is so exciting, there are some detractors. There are some people who feel like gene editing has moral ramifications. Is that something that you've encountered?
You know, we heard about that related to other gene editing procedures, but in this case, we're doing what's called somatic editing, that is only treating a particular part of the body, the retina, to treat a serious disease. In our discussions with bioethicists, we have confirmed that there really aren't ethical concerns about that. So this is different than trying to edit the germline where changes could be inherited. This is not what's going on in our study.
So the limitations of editing these genes could not potentially be passed on to another generation? Is that what I'm hearing from you?
That's correct. The goal is to fix the gene in the retinas of the treated patient, but this wouldn't produce an inheritable change in their genome.
Fascinating stuff. Dr. Eric Pierce, thank you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to join you.
And a quick note, we discussed gene editing and CRISPR in the CBSN Originals documentary, Playing God, The Ethics of Editing Your DNA. You can stream it at any time at cbsnews.com/genetics.
So really interesting stuff when you start to think about the science, the ethical ramifications, the frontiers of gene editing. One of the things I want to highlight there in the video that I think was really interesting is the treatment of non-inheritable types of DNA sequences. So again, this is something that is different from eye color, from hair color, from height, and body style, whether you're athletic or non-athletic, thin, athletic, whatever you want to gauge there. What he's talking about is a defect that is non-inheritable. It's just something that occurs randomly and unfortunately in some patients. And so going in and correcting that, it's still controversial. Again, as you saw there on the CBS documentary, there is some aspect of playing God in a way. But let me go ahead and register in on it. And this is just the opinion of a professor. I could certainly be wrong about this, but that science will evolve. I think that we will see a lot more research, and we're going to start to really get into the science of preventing diseases rather than trying to cure them once they have appeared. And I think this is very, very true in cancer research. It's very difficult to see how cancer is treated. It's radiation, chemotherapy, and perhaps some of you have seen this in loved ones. It's something that is state of the art these days, but it's also very discouraging and very hard for the patient and hard for the family. And so you wonder, is there a way to prevent that, to correct that, that mutation, that gene sequence before the cancer appears, or at least to give someone that may be presenting that type of sequence a chance not to have that metastasize into something very, very bad that they have to deal with later. So it's an interesting science. It's very controversial, but one of the things that I would also advise you when you're starting to think about technology and starting to see it, there are many things in a technological frontier that challenge us, that make us uncomfortable, if that's the right word. And I think as business people, as scientists, we have to study them for what they are and sometimes put biases aside and sometimes put that on the back burner. It doesn't mean you have to lose your beliefs or your view of what life is and what ethics are. We don't, that you never want to lose that, you know, your grounding of that. But you also have to think a little bit more broadly about what the ramifications are and who might benefit. And although it seems like witchcraft today, in the future, that might be a very mainstream form of treatment. So I do think we're going to see a lot more in gene editing. The early successes are very startling and very good. So the early first forms and second forms of that technology are very promising. Well, let's move away from the human body into the agricultural and biosciences. This is another very, very exciting field when we start to think about taking what is in nature and then applying it or re-engineering it so that it has use. Now, of course, one of the big news stories is certainly COVID-19. It is unlike anything that has been seen, certainly impacting us day in and day out, and something to be concerned about, not just COVID-19, but any type of influenza or any type of pandemic that might disrupt our lives and disrupt our way of living. One of the interesting early remedies, if you will, are certainly one of the promising sciences, is the drug that fights malaria. Well, interestingly enough, the drug that fights malaria, or the science that is sort of applied to that, is right out of the biosciences. It is an occurring element in nature called artemisinin. And artemisinin is basically found in sawgrass. And so if you can take sawgrass and turn it into a drug that fights malaria, the agricultural and biosciences may be one of the most promising of the sciences in terms of combating influenza and other things that occur, diseases that occur that can be passed on from person to person. So it's kind of interesting to see how the earth provides sometimes remedy for things that are not so good in our walk of life. So let's take a look now at this technology of agricultural and biosciences.
Jay Kiesling wants to turn plants into fuel for cars, trucks, and planes. Using the tools of biotechnology, he's taken genes from different sources and made them work together in microbes he can grow in the lab.
These organisms grow really well on things like sugar. They'll grow very rapidly and double from a single organism all the way up to a culture of 1 billion organisms overnight. Once the organism grows up, we can turn on a switch inside the organism that we've built to produce a particular product.
The first product of his microbe factories was a drug that cures malaria called artemisinin.
Artemisinin is a natural product. It's produced by a plant. It was found many centuries ago to be useful for treating malaria. It's actually an ancient Chinese therapy. It's currently produced by harvesting these plants, growing up the plants, harvesting the plants, and extracting the drug. But that's an expensive, time-consuming process. We reasoned that we could take the genes from this plant and from other organisms, assemble them together in yeast and or E. coli, and get those organisms to grow on sugar and produce the drug in plentiful supplies. Therefore, we reduce the price and increase the supply for people in the developing world.
But Jay Kiesling didn't stop there.
Artemisinin is a hydrocarbon. It's the same or very similar composition to diesel fuel. And since we had created a platform host that would produce large quantities of this anti-malarial drug, it was a matter of swapping out a couple of genes that produce the anti-malarial drug and swapping in a couple of genes that would produce the diesel fuel. The beauty of working with a microbe is that you can grow them in a test tube in a laboratory, or you can grow them in enormous tanks. A little bit of work between a test tube and a tank, but they scale beautifully.
Kiesling's diesel-making bugs need sugar as food, and he now plans to get that sugar from an unlikely source.
If you think about your shirt, a cotton shirt, that's all sugar, and yet it doesn't dissolve in the washing machine.
Shirts don't dissolve for the same reason the stems and leaves of plants don't dissolve. The sugars they contain are linked together in long chains in the plant cell walls. So in Jay Kiesling's lab, scientists are devising ways to liberate the cell wall sugars from plants that are otherwise of little value. Plants like switchgrass.
Switchgrass is a native of the plain states in the US. It grows without a lot of fertilizer or water, and it has a high content of sugars that we can turn into fuels.
So Jay Kiesling imagines a future in which plants that don't compete with agricultural crops for land provide the sugars for making fuels, a direct pipeline from grass to your tank.
Again, fascinating stuff. One of the things that I want you to focus on there, again, if you noticed, there was a little bit of DNA editing even in the agricultural sciences, and notice how they take anti-malarial drug and turn it into something that then is used for the creation of diesel fuel. And so if you think about the future of trying to combat some of the things that we're seeing today in terms of different strains of flu, different types of diseases that may be communicable, this is actually one of the forefront sciences. It's going to be biotech. It's definitely going to be biotech. And it's going to be in this aspect of gene editing, or taking a look at creating different types of cell structures that can combat the things that we see in nature that aren't so good. So it's very fascinating, again, to see how science has progressed. It gives us a lot of hope. So should you be a little bit concerned, and a lot concerned maybe, about some of the things that you're seeing in terms of healthcare, know that there's also science that is racing forward to try to correct those things. And certainly one of those is biotech, and certainly agriculture and life sciences that are really at the forefront of creating new treatments to combat some of the things that we're seeing in today's world. Well, that moves us into the data around it. And another interesting aspect of this is bioinformatics. Bioinformatics is a booming industry. And this is where pervasive computing meets artificial intelligence that then meets biotechnology. One of the things that's really necessary for a lot of the new treatment programs and a lot of the new treatment therapies is huge amounts of data, and being able to manipulate and shape that data so that we can get some predictive statistics, some predictive analytics around some of the treatments and around what we're seeing in DNA sequences and in biological sequences. Well, that is bioinformatics. It is a huge business. It is a huge part of healthcare. Again, from the standpoint of, where you sit as a business leader, it really is the idea of building business models around this combination of biology, analytics, and healthcare, those three bubbles starting to move together. So let's take a look at the business of bioinformatics. Again, we're combining a lot of different aspects here, from biochemistry, statistics, mathematics, engineering, computer science. One of the leading firms in bioinformatics, or certainly one of the emerging leading firms, is SAS in Cary, North Carolina. They are actually building a lot of technology platforms to really collect bioinformatic information, everything from what you generate in the Apple Watch that you wear, implantable devices, all the way to the data that you leave at the doctor's office when you go for your checkups. So again, combining all these things in the betterment of healthcare is the realm of bioinformatics, and it is revolutionizing.
Life sciences are gradually being dominated by big data. By 2025, it is expected that the genomes of 1 billion people will have been sequenced. In other words, we are likely to generate somewhere between 2 and 40 billion gigabytes of genome data within the next decade. And that's only the human genome data. Life sciences can nowadays also obtain measurements on millions of proteins, metabolites, and their interactions. To make sense of enormous volumes of complex data, interdisciplinary researchers are needed to combine knowledge from biology, computer science, and statistics. Forming an essential component of modern-day life science research, this field is known as bioinformatics. One place where this work is carried out is at the Utrecht Bioinformatics Center. Studying the right data can lead to truly groundbreaking discoveries. By analyzing millions of DNA sequence fragments through high-performance computing, we were able to bring to light new unknown organisms. By identifying the 0.1% of a human genome that differs from person to person, we can explain just why two people never look the same. And by predicting the structures of proteins in a cell, we are beginning to understand why some of us get sick while others live long, healthy lives. These are the reasons why Utrecht Science Park promotes the sharing of bioinformatics expertise and the combining of different disciplines. Together, life sciences and big data can help us address the challenges of tomorrow.
Okay, that's incredible. What's really interesting about what you just saw there are a couple of things. First of all, you can see the convergence of biology with computer sciences, with big data. Again, when you think about your technology forecasting model, you really go back to those reference sciences, trying to see what the trends are, and then you can sort of move that forward to first forms of technology, which you saw there in that particular presentation. What was really interesting, and one of the things I hope that you saw there, was data visualization, where they were using 3D holographic information. You saw that in pervasive computing, but here it shows up again in bioinformatics. Here's some great news about that. They need business people. You've got scientists and you've got a lot of computer programmers and information specialists that are creating this massive amounts of data. Plus, you've got people volunteering their DNA sequencing to 23andMe and Ancestry.com. So now you've got this huge database of bioinformatics and DNA data. And so what they're trying to do is, number one, make sense of it to try to, again, understand how diseases occur, why they occur in some people, why they do not occur in other people. And they're also trying to create business models around the explosion of bioinformatic data that is now entering the marketplace. And so this is where there's a huge opportunity for science to meet business. There's a critical need for business models, for business thinking around that space. It's not something where business arrives first and then looks back at science. Science has arrived there first, but they're not sure how to create the business model. So this is where they need your expertise and your leadership. Well, the final greatest hits of biotechnology is biometrics. Again, this one is very controversial because one of the more popular types of biometrics is face recognition, as well as voice and fingerprint and palm recognition. It's controversial because it does take away some of your anonymity, but it's coming. It is something that we're going to see more and more of to try to secure facilities, to try to ensure public safety. Again, one of the companies that I'm working with, Quantify, is a leader in this type of technology. And there is incredible demand out there for the technology to try to make every place you go a little bit safer, a little bit more secure, and yet to give you access, should you need access to a particular location. It's going to be the technology that either allows you to drive a car or does not allow you to drive a car based on whether you are above or below the legal limit of being drunk. You might have to take a breathalyzer test before you can jump in and drive a car in the future. It's certainly something that is going to change the way we build facilities, the way we access technology, and the way that technology interacts with us. So let's take a look at face recognition. Interestingly enough, thumbprint recognition, face recognition is developed by a company right here in Research Triangle Park, RTI. The RTI Institute is actually a leader in this type of technology. They do the work for the Department of Defense, and it is incredible. So let's take a look at face recognition technology. Wow. Something very, very new, something very, very different. I know that that can be a little overwhelming. I think that sometimes we feel like, wow, you know, I don't want to be watched all the time, or I want my anonymity. This is coming your way. In fact, if you are someone that travels internationally, it's quite possible, in fact, quite likely, that face recognition technology, you've already been exposed to it, and it has already verified your identity, whether entering or leaving a country. It is something that you're going to see more and more of. Now, again, it's one of those things where you start to really think about the business case for it. If you're in a business facility, is this a way to try to secure that facility, try to improve the process of ensuring that only authorized personnel are in that facility? It also gives you a way for customer engagement too. So again, there are different aspects of this that are going to lend itself to incredible business models. It's coming your way. It's headed our way. It's something that hopefully, and I think quite possibly, will make the world around us a little bit safer. But the cost of that is some of our anonymity. And of course, you can see where the next step will go, where face recognition may be the thing that is used to try to pay for things at the supermarket, or it may be the thing that authorizes you on Amazon.com. And again, the reason this works really gets into the thing that we talked about at the beginning, your DNA. Nobody looks quite like you. Your face is very, very unique. There are points on your face that are unique and that cannot be altered, even in catastrophic accidents or by cosmetic surgery. There are things that can be identified about your face through all of those things. So it's really an interesting technology in terms of what it might bring to us. But all of this in biotechnology, I think, is something that challenges us, that gives us pause sometimes. But what I really want you to take away from this, and what I really want you to think about, are two things. Number one, while it's going to create a lot of challenges, there are enormous benefits. There are many things that will be made possible by advances in biotechnology that will end some aspects of suffering, that will allow people to live better lives, and that will give us a better chance of effectively treating diseases that for the longest time have been horrible, and certainly something that's impacted a lot of families. So I think you have to think about that. On the flip side of that, so in thing number one, there are two sides of the thing to think about here. Number one, the positives. Number two, the ethical challenges. You know, how do we go forward responsibly? How do we go forward in a way that makes sense, that benefits society, that contributes to the greater good, but does not turn us into a designer society, so to speak, in biotechnology. So we have to think about that. Thing number two to think about, and it's the thing that I keep, I think, emphasizing to you throughout this journey together. As business people, we have to really think about what these new business models will be. What new businesses will be created from this that we couldn't even imagine 5 years ago or 10 years ago? What will those businesses look like? How will they create value? What types of people will they employ? What types of services will they create? What will be the way that technology is paid for? And how can it be made available to those who really need it, to everybody, not just the wealthy or those that can afford it. So again, it really brings a lot of challenges to the forefront from the standpoint of the types of businesses that will evolve. But my prediction around biotechnology is that we're going to see businesses that invent themselves around these technologies that we could not imagine years and years ago. So again, it's something to think about. It's something to really consider, but also it is an industry that is in dire need of business thinking. So if you're someone who has been thinking about a career and you're thinking about where's my place in the world, it's tempting not to think about life sciences because you may say, well, I don't have the background. I wasn't a chemistry major. I wasn't a biology major. I never worked in a lab a day in my life. Believe me, they have plenty of people that have done all those things. What they really don't have are people to invent the new businesses, to think about those new businesses and to build revenue models. So I would encourage you, if you're interested in this aspect of technology, to consider it, to give it some thought. It is an amazing and evolving world. Okay, that's biotechnology, a fun ride, but a different ride from mesh computing and from pervasive computing. It's something a little bit different, but I think it's fascinating. And it's something that I enjoy learning about and reading about every day because the science is evolving so much. So we'll wrap it up for biotechnology here from Studio 720, high atop Chapel Hill. If you're following in sequence here, the next video that I will film and that I will do will be on the topic of 3D printing, which we are just starting to get into that industry. There's going to be so much more in that industry as it goes forward. So you stay safe, and I will see you on the next recording.